The sharp clink of a coffee cup hitting the saucer echoed through the small cafe, followed by the faint sound of footsteps as someone entered. Sarah Nguyen barely lifted her head, too absorbed in the pages of her book to care about the usual rush of customers. It had been one of those days, a day that felt like any other, one where nothing seemed to shift or change. But little did she know, today would be the day that her world would tilt, and everything she thought she knew about herself would begin to unravel. It all started with a simple question. "Excuse me, is that your ruby ring?" Sarah froze, her fingers instinctively curling around the ring on her finger, the cool metal somehow giving her comfort despite the unexpectedness of the question. She looked up, startled, to find a man standing before her. He was tall, dressed in a well-tailored suit that seemed out of place in the casual ambiance of the cafe. His dark brown eyes were fixed on her hand, the very hand she instinctively pulled closer to her chest. The stranger's gaze lingered for a moment before he quickly realized how forward he had been. "I'm sorry," he added quickly, sensing her discomfort. "I didn't mean to intrude. I was just struck by the ring. It's unusual." Sarah swallowed hard. Unusual. She had always been told it was a family heirloom, something sacred passed down from her mother. Her fingers tightened around it, as if the small gesture would protect her from any unwanted questions. It was one of the few things that connected her to the woman who had raised her, a bond that had been severed far too soon. The man stood awkwardly for a moment before offering a half smile, clearly realizing he had overstepped. "I must sound ridiculous," he said with a light chuckle, trying to break the tension. "I'm Daniel Huang, by the way." He extended his hand, an open gesture meant to ease the situation. Sarah hesitated. She wasn't used to being approached, especially not by strangers in places like this. Still, something about Daniel's polite demeanor made her put her reservations aside, just for a moment. She reached out and shook his hand, noting the firm grip, the slight warmth of his touch, but most of all, the way his eyes never left the ruby ring. "Sarah Nguyen," she replied, keeping her tone neutral. "What brings you here today?" Daniel glanced around the cafe before sitting down in the chair across from her, as though he hadn't planned on this interaction but couldn't walk away. His casual suit, a bit crumpled from what Sarah assumed had been a long day, contrasted with the sharpness of his gaze, which seemed almost too intense for such a simple cafe. "I come here every now and then," he said, shifting uncomfortably. "And I couldn't help but notice the ring. It reminds me of something. Something long buried." Sarah raised an eyebrow, curiosity beginning to bloom, but she said nothing. She didn't want to give away that the mention of the ring had caught her off guard. The ruby, with its deep red hue, had always felt like a piece of her mother's spirit, a piece of her that she could carry. But why did this stranger feel the need to point it out? "Is there a story behind it?" Daniel asked, his voice softening. He seemed genuinely curious, but there was something else in his tone. A subtle urgency, a tone that hinted that this conversation was more than just a simple exchange. Sarah felt her chest tighten. The mention of her mother's name, the memories of her passing a few years ago, always brought a flood of emotions that she wasn't prepared to deal with in public, especially not with someone she barely knew. "Yes," Sarah answered slowly, her fingers instinctively twisting the ring around her finger. "It belonged to my mother. It was her promise to me. Something important." She hesitated before adding, "She passed away not long ago." For a moment, Daniel's face softened, and his expression became one of sympathy. But something flickered in his eyes, a hint of recognition, or perhaps something deeper. Before Sarah could ask about it, He leaned forward slightly, as if he was about to reveal a secret. "I didn't mean to make this awkward," he said quietly, "but I think I have seen that ring before." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. She stared at him, her mind racing. What did he mean by that? How could he have seen it before? Her mother had kept the ring close, never letting anyone see it or mention it. Sarah was sure she had never told anyone about it. Certainly not someone like Daniel. "You've seen it before?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Where?" Daniel didn't answer right away. Instead, he stared down at his coffee cup, swirling the liquid absently. "I'm not sure," he finally said, "but something about it feels familiar, almost as if it were meant to be seen by me." The air around them seemed to thicken, charged with an unspoken connection neither of them could understand. And as Sarah looked into Daniel's eyes, a sudden realization struck her. This man, this stranger, might just be the key to unlocking the mystery her mother had left behind. The cafe was quieter now, the steady hum of conversations fading into the background as Sarah and Daniel continued their tense, unfinished conversation. As much as Sarah tried to push the nagging thought from her mind, the question echoed in her head. How could he have seen the ring before? Sarah glanced at Daniel, watching the way his fingers toyed with his coffee cup, absent-mindedly tapping the rim. There was something strange about him, something that made her feel both curious and cautious. He wasn't just another businessman or tourist passing through. He seemed oddly familiar. And that wasn't a feeling Sarah was accustomed to having with strangers. "You said the ring felt familiar," she said, leaning forward slightly, the faintest edge of her voice betraying her growing interest. "What do you mean by that?" Daniel hesitated for a moment, his eyes flicking to the door and then back to her, as if weighing whether to continue. He set his coffee cup down with a quiet clink. The decision made. "It's hard to explain," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. "But I swear, I've seen a ring like that before. It looks very similar to one I saw when I was a kid." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "When you were a kid?" "Yeah," Daniel continued, his voice quiet but steady. "It's tied to a place, really. A memory I can't quite piece together." His voice dropped almost to a whisper. "A place that's been out of my life for a long time now." Sarah felt the hair on the back of her neck prickle with curiosity. The mention of a place, something so intimate, made her wonder if this was more than just a coincidence. She had always kept her mother's secrets close to her chest, never asking too many questions. Now, with this man across from her, someone who seemed to know something about her mother's past, she could feel the walls of her carefully constructed life beginning to crack. "What place?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "And why would you mention it now?" Daniel leaned back in his chair, his fingers massaging the edge of the table. He sighed heavily. "I know this is strange, but hear me out. I grew up in a home for orphaned children, Sunshine Children's Home. My father was involved with the orphanage, and, well, I spent a lot of time there when I was young. Sunshine Children's Home." The name struck Sarah like a bolt of lightning. She had heard her mother mention it only once, when Sarah was very young, but never in detail. It was always an offhand comment, a fleeting remark about an old job she had before Sarah was adopted. "Sunshine?" Sarah echoed, her heart racing. "Why would you bring that up?" Daniel's eyes softened with understanding, as if he had finally found someone who could understand the weight of the memory. "Because," he said slowly, "there was a girl there, Lily, I think her name was. She was always wearing a ring, just like yours." He paused, as if seeing the pieces fit in his mind. She wore it around her neck on a chain, but it looked exactly like the one you're wearing. And she was special. I don't know how to explain it, but something about her. She was always different. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. Lily. The name sounded too familiar, but she couldn't place it. Was it possible her mother had been connected to this orphanage? Was this man talking about something that could unlock the mystery of her past? But before she could ask more, Daniel stood abruptly, his hand reaching for his coat. "I'm sorry. I know this is a lot to take in. I didn't mean to overwhelm you." He looked over at Sarah, his face now full of uncertainty. "I don't know what to say, but if you ever want to talk more or find out more about this, I can help. I might know more than I'm saying, but..." His voice trailed off, and he seemed to hesitate for a moment, caught in some internal struggle. Sarah's heart began to beat faster. She knew she couldn't let this moment pass without understanding more. "Wait," Sarah said quickly, standing up as well, her hand reaching out instinctively. "What do you mean, you might know more? What happened to this Lily? And why did you bring all this up now?" Daniel gave her a long, measured look, as if deciding whether to trust her with more of the truth. "Because," he said finally, lowering his voice, "I'm not just anyone. My name is Daniel Huang, but my real name, well, it's Reynolds." At his words, Sarah felt the ground beneath her feet shift. Her heart skipped a beat. Reynolds? Was he saying what she thought he was saying? Could it be possible that the man standing before her was connected to her mother's past in a way that no one had ever told her? "Reynolds," Sarah repeated, her voice trembling. "As in, the Reynolds family? The one everyone talks about in the papers?" Daniel nodded. "The same. And I think I might be able to help you find the answers you're looking for. The answers about your mother. And about that ring." Before Sarah could process the weight of his words, he turned and walked toward the door, leaving her standing in the cafe, utterly stunned, trying to make sense of everything she had just heard. The door closed behind him with a soft chime, and Sarah was left alone, the room feeling colder now, as though a truth long buried had just been brought to the surface. Her fingers instinctively touched the ruby ring, the same one her mother had worn, the one that had now become the key to everything. She had no idea what Daniel's connection to the past was, or how deeply this story would go. But she knew one thing for sure: nothing would be the same again. The next few days felt like a blur for Sarah. She spent hours pacing her apartment, trying to decipher the cryptic messages in her late mother's journal. The pages were filled with fragmented sentences, hints of a past that she could barely understand, and most of all, an overwhelming sense of unease that her mother had left her with. It was clear that the connection between her family and Jack's went far deeper than either of them could have imagined. Meanwhile, Jack couldn't stop thinking about the ruby ring. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the reflection of the deep red stone glistening under the afternoon sun. The way it seemed to pulse with something he couldn't place sent shivers down his spine. His father's words echoed in his mind, reminding him of all the promises he'd made to keep the family's secrets buried forever. But now, after meeting Emily and seeing the ring, the reality that had been hidden for so long was starting to take shape. Something had happened 15 years ago, something that both their lives were entwined in. Jack knew that he had to confront his father. He couldn't let this go. He couldn't live in the shadow of lies anymore. And yet, he had to be careful. Richard Reynolds was not a man who tolerated betrayal, especially not from his own son. The night after their conversation in the diner, Jack found himself standing outside his father's towering mansion. The cold wind whipped through the trees as he stared up at the place that had once felt like home. But now, it only felt like a prison, one that he had been living in for far too long. His phone buzzed in his pocket, and he pulled it out to see a message from Emily. "Do you think we're ready to find out the truth?" The words hit him like a punch to the gut. Were they ready? Were they prepared for the secrets that could shatter their lives? He wasn't sure, but he knew that running away from the truth was no longer an option. Taking a deep breath, Jack rang the doorbell. His father's butler, an older man with a blank expression, opened the door, looking at Jack with an unreadable gaze. "Mr. Reynolds, your father is expecting you." Jack nodded, stepping inside. The interior was as grand as ever, the marble floors gleaming under the chandelier lights. He followed the butler through the long hallway, feeling the weight of the silence in the air. His father had to know he was coming. He was never one to be caught off guard. "Jack," Richard's voice rang out from the study before he even reached the door. "Come in. I've been expecting you." Richard Reynolds sat behind his mahogany desk, his suit impeccably tailored as always. His piercing eyes met Jack's as he entered, and for a moment, Jack could almost feel the history of their family pressing down on him. But Jack wasn't the young, obedient son anymore. He was someone who was ready to fight for the truth. "You've been busy, haven't you?" Richard asked, his voice smooth, almost too calm. "I can tell from the way you've been poking around that you've started to uncover things." Jack clenched his fists, trying to control the rush of anger that surged inside him. "I want to know the truth about Emily, about my sister, and why you've been hiding all of this." Richard leaned back in his chair, a slight smile on his lips. "You think you know the whole story, Jack? You're just scratching the surface." His eyes flickered briefly, as though considering how much to reveal. "I knew this day would come. You can't hide from the past forever, can you?" Jack's stomach twisted, as Richard's words hung in the air like a dark cloud. "What are you talking about?" he demanded. "I need to understand. Why did you hide her from me? Why Emily?" Richard's smile faded, and for the first time, Jack saw a flicker of something. Guilt? Fear? His father stood up, walking around the desk to stand in front of him. "Because, Jack," Richard said quietly, "I had to make sure everything stayed in my control. I had a plan. You were always the chosen one, the heir. But she—" He paused, as though unsure how to finish his sentence. "She wasn't supposed to be part of this. Not until now." Jack's heart pounded in his chest. His mind raced. "You're saying Emily, Lily, is part of your plan? What does that even mean?" Richard's eyes hardened. "You'll understand soon enough, Jack. But first, you need to make a choice." He placed a folder on the desk in front of him. "This is everything. The truth, the full story. All you need to know." Jack stared at the folder for a long moment, unsure of what to expect. He had a choice: take the information, confront his father, and risk it all, or walk away and let the secrets remain buried. But he knew deep down that there was no walking away anymore. The choice had already been made. Jack stared at the folder Richard had placed in front of him. It looked ordinary, just a manila envelope with the edges slightly worn from use. But he knew that within it lay the answers to questions he had spent his entire life avoiding. He could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on him. His father had just given him the keys to the truth, but what would he do with them? For a moment, Jack's mind raced. The power his father had always wielded over him was undeniable. Richard had built an empire on control, on the manipulation of those closest to him. And now, Emily, Lily, was somehow a part of that web. Could he really trust his father's version of the truth? "Open it, Jack," Richard's voice cut through the silence, coaxing him like a puppet master pulling at invisible strings. "You'll understand everything. You've been so eager to uncover what's been hidden. Well, now's your chance." Jack's hand hovered over the folder, the choice hanging in the balance. Part of him wanted to reject it, to walk away and never look back. But another part, the part that was tired of living in his father's shadow, the part that wanted to know the truth, urged him to open it. With a steady hand, Jack ripped the envelope open. Inside were pages and pages of documents, contracts, photographs, birth certificates, and handwritten notes. His eyes skimmed over the pages, searching for something, anything that would explain why his father had kept this from him for so long. One photograph caught his attention. It was a faded image of two little girls, both no older than 5 or 6, their faces bright with innocence. One of them was unmistakably Emily, Lily, but the other, the second girl, looked eerily familiar. The resemblance was uncanny. Jack felt his heart skip a beat. He recognized that little girl, the other twin, the one his father had claimed had died at birth. "Lily," Jack muttered under his breath, his voice barely audible. "Elizabeth." The realization hit him like a ton of bricks. Elizabeth, the twin who had supposedly died, was alive. And not only that, but she was standing right in front of him, in the form of Emily. Richard stood silently behind him, his expression unreadable. The silence between them was thick, filled with the weight of the revelation. Jack slowly turned to face his father, his mind spinning. "How long, Father?" Jack's voice was low, controlled. "How long have you been lying to me? About her? About everything?" Richard's gaze didn't waver. "It was never about lying, Jack. It was about survival. My survival. Your survival. This business, this empire I've built, it's fragile. I couldn't afford any surprises. You were always the one I chose. But Lily, Emily, she was a complication, a backup, a safeguard." Jack's mind was racing. He couldn't wrap his head around it. A backup? A safeguard for what? For me? His chest tightened as the pieces started to fall into place. "You were going to replace me, weren't you? If I didn't live up to your expectations, you were going to use her as your heir." Richard's eyes flickered for a moment. "It was never about replacing you, Jack. It was about ensuring that the company remained in the family no matter what. You don't understand the pressures of running a legacy like this. The world is full of competition. I did what I had to do to protect us." Jack shook his head, his anger building. "You took her away from me. You took away her chance to live a normal life. You used her like a chess piece." Richard's face darkened, his jaw tightening. "You think this is easy for me? You think I wanted to keep all these secrets? I did it because I loved you, because I was trying to protect you." Jack slammed the folder onto the desk, his frustration boiling over. "Protect me? You're a liar, Father. You've been using me and everyone around you for your own gain. And now you want me to believe that you were protecting us? That's the biggest lie of all." The weight of the truth hung heavy in the air. Jack couldn't keep his composure anymore. He couldn't pretend that he understood his father's actions, nor could he accept them. "I can't do this," Jack said, his voice shaking with emotion. "I can't be a part of this empire anymore. Not with all these lies. Not with the way you've treated her." He motioned to the photograph on the table. "Emily deserves better. She deserves the truth. And so do I." Richard's expression hardened, his voice cold. "You're making a mistake, Jack. You'll regret this." But Jack was done. He couldn't ignore the truth anymore. The empire, the legacy, all of it had been built on manipulation and deceit. It was time to break free. He stood up from the chair, his decision clear. "I'm done, Father. I'm not your puppet anymore." Jack walked toward the door, the weight of the folder still in his hands. He knew what he had to do next. He had to find Emily. He had to tell her everything. They both deserved to know the full truth. The sun had just begun to dip below the horizon as Jack made his way through the winding streets of Queens. He hadn't told Emily everything yet. There was still so much to explain, so much to unpack. But he knew that time was running out. His father's empire was built on manipulation, deceit, and secrets. But in the end, it was the truth that would set them free. As Jack pulled up to the small, modest apartment building where Emily lived with her uncle, the weight of his decision pressed heavily on his chest. It was all going to change. There was no going back now. He took a deep breath before stepping out of the car and walking toward the front door. The building was quiet, a stark contrast to the chaos that had been swirling in his mind for days. When Jack entered the small apartment, he found Emily sitting at the kitchen table, her legs swinging beneath her chair as she absent-mindedly flipped through the pages of a notebook. Uncle Matthew was nowhere to be seen, likely out running errands or working. Emily's eyes lifted from the notebook as Jack entered, a smile lighting up her face when she saw him. "Hi, Mr. Reynolds. What's all this about? You've been so quiet lately." Jack swallowed hard. It wasn't easy, but he knew this was it, the moment where everything changed. He closed the door softly behind him before sitting down across from her. "Emily," he began, his voice thick with emotion, "I've been keeping a lot of things from you. Things that you deserve to know." Her smile faltered, and she studied him curiously, sensing the seriousness in his tone. "What things?" she asked, her voice small. Jack hesitated, glancing down at his hands before meeting her eyes again. "You remember the ring, don't you? The ruby one?" Emily nodded, her fingers instinctively reaching for the ring on her finger, the same one that had been a connection between them from the very beginning. "I don't know everything, Emily," Jack continued, "but I know now that the ring isn't just a memento. It's part of a much bigger story. A story about you, about your family, about my family, about me." Emily's brow furrowed as she listened, confusion creeping into her features. "What do you mean? What's going on?" Jack's heart ached as he saw her uncertainty. "You're not just some random girl, Emily. You're not just Sarah Collins's daughter. You're not just I'm not just some random guy who happened to fix your car." He paused, struggling to find the right words, the weight of everything he was about to say crashing down on him. "You're my sister." The words hung in the air, the revelation like a bolt of lightning that struck both their hearts simultaneously. Emily's eyes widened, her mouth opening and closing as if she couldn't process what he had just said. What are you talking about?" Jack could feel his pulse quicken as he looked at her. "I don't expect you to believe me right away, but I have the proof, Emily. I have the documents. Your mother, Sarah, worked for my family a long time ago. Your birth certificate, the adoption papers, everything points to the truth. You're the daughter of Richard Reynolds and Olivia, and you have a twin sister named Elizabeth." The room seemed to go still as Emily processed the information, her face contorted, trying to make sense of it all. No, that can't be right," she whispered, shaking her head. "You're lying. I don't know what you're talking about." Jack took a deep breath and reached into his pocket, pulling out the manila folder he'd carried with him for days. He opened it slowly, showing her the photograph, the one with two little girls, their faces radiant with innocence. "This is you, Emily. You and your twin sister, Elizabeth. My father, Richard, he kept this from me. He told me she was dead. He told me that you were the one who survived. But he was lying. You've been hidden from me all this time." He watched as Emily's hands trembled as she reached for the photograph, her eyes welling up with tears. The realization began to sink in. She looked up at Jack, a quiet sob escaping her lips. "Elizabeth, my twin sister. She's alive?" Jack nodded. "She is. I think she's still out there somewhere. And together, we can find her." The silence between them stretched out, heavy with the weight of the truth. Emily wiped away her tears and glanced at Jack, her face reflecting a mix of disbelief and hope. But why? Why did he do all this? Why separate us? Jack felt his anger rise once more. "It was never about us, Emily. It was about control. My father, he has this obsession with legacy. He thought he could control everything, our lives, our destinies. He thought he could mold us into what he wanted us to be. But we're not his toys. We're not pawns in his game anymore." Emily nodded, wiping away another tear. "What do we do now?" Jack took her hand, his voice steady with resolve. "Now, we stop him. We expose everything. We bring the truth to light." But just as they began to formulate their next steps, the door to the apartment swung open, and Uncle Matthew stepped in, his face immediately falling when he saw the look on their faces. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice tinged with concern. Jack stood up, the folder still in his hand. "We need to talk, Matthew. It's time you knew everything. It's time we all knew the truth." And with that, the three of them gathered around the table, ready to face the man who had controlled their lives for far too long. Jack knew it was going to be a fight against the most powerful man in New York. But he was ready. For the first time in his life, he wasn't afraid. He wasn't just Jack Reynolds anymore. He was Jack Collins, and he was going to reclaim his family.